Neither WJOU or its licensee, Oakwood University, necessarily share all the views expressed in its programs. They are, however, presented as public information.
Good afternoon and welcome to Second Chance. Second Chance is a weekly talk show that examines a wide range of social issues and seeks to inspire physical, emotional, social, and spiritual healing, believing that God is a God of second chances. And through faith, all things are possible. Second Chance airs live each week from the beautiful campus of Oakwood University and features real people with real issues and offers real answers. And now, here's your host, Kenneth Anderson.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Second Chance radio broadcast. I'm Kenny Anderson, always proud to be here in the studio for another conversation with some awesome guests. Second Chance has been airing from this station, WJOU Praise 90.1 FM, since 1990. So we're in our 34th year of broadcasting. And I tell you, folks, I may have another 34 years in me. We'll just have to wait and see. I love doing what I do, and I love taking this opportunity to be able to share with the audience in ways that sometimes escapes us, especially in times like these. We provide inspiration and information and inspiration, and of course, today will be no different. Now, you may be tuning in this afternoon at 90.1 FM, which is our radio station, just boosted to 33,000 watts, and we're so glad and welcome anyone who may be joining us for the first time today to listen in to the broadcast. We also want to welcome those who are listening on the internet at WJOU 90.1 FM. Of course, that's WJOU.org, and you can get our radio station right there. And, of course, TuneIn Radio and the other ways that people can access it online is possible as well. But we want to especially invite those who may not know about the live stream at Praise 90.1 FM on YouTube and Facebook to hop on over there right now, because you can actually watch the conversation. You can drop stuff in the chat, and you can actually engage in this very dynamic space that we provide for you from one week to the next. I'm not going to waste a lot of time with extra fluff and stuff, because I have a couple of very special guests that are going to be joining me today. It's not often that I spend significant amounts of time with my guests. I always try to kind of hit it and quit it, like the great James Brown used to say. And then I try to bring people back into the space to be able to deal with various things. But there's a lot going on, and I thought it would be a very, very important opportunity for us to lock down this brother who is on the show right now. Let me introduce him to those that may not know who he is. Dr. Yohuru Williams is Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and a founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. He received his PhD from the great Howard University. He's the author and editor of several books. My favorite of them, I'm a little bit partial, I've told him this before, is They Call Him Jack, the story of Jackie Robinson, number 42 being my absolute favorite number in the whole wide world. He has appeared on a variety of local and national radio and TV programs, most notably the History Channel, CNN, Fox Business News, NPR, BET, ABC, and so much more. And there's so much more to say about him, but I want to take this time to be able to unpack some things with him. Dr. Williams, you're always so gracious to provide us with an audience. Thank you once again for doing it for us today.
Good to see you, brother, always.
How's life treating you, man?
You know, I'm probably feeling a lot like a lot of your listeners, overwhelmed. The cognitive dissonance of the moment that we find ourselves in. It's been interesting is an understatement.
It's even tough. I feel completely on that. It's tough to sometimes even find the word in that moment to kind of define various elements of what's going on right now. And the show that I did last week, we talked a little bit about the White House gathering on Black History Month. You know, after you spent time dismantling these things and and putting edicts out that you will not honor these particular moments and significance in history, then you have this big celebration. And I asked one of my guests to tell me what you thought about that. And she probably spent 30 seconds just trying to land somewhere, because it's like the cognitive dissonance of that event makes you kind of go, well, where do I begin?
So we caught that show, Kenny, and it was phenomenal for two reasons. Number one, you're hard pressed to find anybody talking about it. Like, to me, what was bizarre is that you did have Roland Martin and a couple of other people kind of weigh in, but it should have been a bigger deal than it was. And so it was nice to have someone bring a guest on to not only name it, but to spend some time in the discomfort of what does that mean for us as Black Americans, who routinely have been gaslit with regard to our history. And gaslighting is the word that kind of, sits with me the best, to have these folks show up at the White House pretending that they're celebrating access without dealing with the history and the wounds that Carter Woodson meant for us to elevate in talking about Black history to begin with. So that whole gathering was a repudiation of what Carter Woodson had worked toward when he founded Negro History Week in 1926, which eventually became Black History Month. This idea that we wanted to celebrate the contributions of Black Americans, but at the same time, to hone in on the fact that there is a tragedy, a travail, and a triumph to our experience. This is a moment of travail. This is like akin to the nadir. This is a man who's committed to eviscerating key sections of law that our people ushered in, that have helped to become the new foundation for a new American freedom. The 14th Amendment, legal scholars describe as the Second American Revolution. The new birth of freedom comes as a result of the emancipation of 4.5 million slaves. So to have these handkerchief head Negroes, excuse my language, show up but that's what Malcolm X would call them, show up at the White House and mug for the camera in proximity to this person who, has more in common with the worst of the white segregationists leaders of the 1950s and 60s, the people that, the George Wallaces before his redemption, and the James Eastlands and others. And to celebrate Black History Month, to me, it was worse than during his first term, Trump suggesting that Frederick Douglass was still alive. At least that was comical. This wasn't comical.
It was not comical, and it was painful because of the profound ignorance that was on display there among people who felt like they were making a statement, who really didn't understand, as my guest described it, they were basically engaged in buffoonery. And they had no idea, they had no clue, and they were willing to defend their being there on the basis of various elements that aren't even grounded in reality in terms of the journey. You have talked a little bit about, and maybe even a lot about, but I follow you on all your social media spots, especially LinkedIn, and kudos on the great work that you're doing there, because we need spaces where people are actually creating an opportunity to give voice to things that people need to talk about. And of course, I appreciate you for that. And you talked a lot about the dismantling of the Department of Education. I'm an educator. You're an educator. We spent significant amount of times in the education space. We've benefited from education. We know the history of denial of education to people of color, especially Black people in our nation. And this, to me, seems to be one of the worst elements of this process, talking about the dismantling of the Department of Education. You have some very specific ideas about what the implications of that are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
A couple of things there, Kenny. Number one, and again, because I just mentioned, I check out the show whenever I get an opportunity.
Thank you.
Our people historically have had to pursue what one scholar described as kind of fugitive pedagogy or fugitive knowledge, creating spaces to be educated because we couldn't count on ourselves being reflected in the curriculum. And then we weren't able to talk about those things that were significant to our community. Economic denial of economic opportunity, political chicanery, social segregation. And so our educational spaces, by definition, have always been politicized because it's always been about how we overcome those challenges, those impediments, legal and otherwise. I listened to the show last week, and like I said, I catch whenever I can because I think, particularly in a moment where legacy media is under assault and we have to be more discriminating in terms of what we consume, there are very few venues left where you have progressive voices who want to teach, who want to create a space for dialogue, who really want to give people things to think about and ruminate on. And yours is one of them. And I say that, but which is why I always take the opportunity to come on the show. I think in this moment in particular, Black folks in particular have to find more mediums to do this. Social media is fine, but a bit problematic. Legacy media, we can't count on to address this because Trump has been, and the Trump administration has been so effective in marginalizing and neutering legacy media. And so it's really going to be spaces like this. And so it's, just because I have the opportunity to say it to you, you and I go way back and I love your work, but I say this now more than ever. This is what we need. And we need to do a better job of promoting these spaces and these conversations. Having said that, the assault on DOE is essential to our community because the Department of Education, whatever problems people may have with it, has been one of the principal conduits to freedom and enfranchisement for Black people. So the reality is, if we think about the tools that were utilized to deny us participation in the political process, the literacy test, the poll tax, they were all about literacy at their core. So a Department of Education, even though it's a more recent phenomena, that addressed the issues of economic inequality, access and opportunity, were in many ways issues that were tied to core issues in our community. Secondly, the Department of Education's mission and work around dealing with issues of students of color, access and opportunity through the TRIO programs, for example, the Menair scholarships and things like so on and so forth, have been also important in terms of ensuring pathways to higher education, in addition to access to quality K-12 education. Now, there are all kinds of arguments that people kind of get embroiled in here about charter schools and public schools. I want to leave all those behind for just a second and just focus on the core issue. The federal government, when Jefferson and others make the case, the founders, as problematic as they were, make the case that an informed electorate is critical to the preservation of democratic practice. When you then take away the only cabinet level position that addresses issues of education that ensure that informed electorate, that to me is political suicide, and it feels very intentional for somebody who desires to be an autocrat and wants to move us toward a dictatorship. Because you're then ensuring that people don't have the ability to think critically because you're defunding education. You literally are defunding the federal government's arm of education, leaving that to the states. And we know, particularly if you're talking about states like Mississippi, Alabama, there are going to be huge issues and implications for communities of color. But even in states like Minnesota, where I live, one of the things that came out of the murder of George Floyd is that we fall behind every state in the union, or we did in 2020, in educational outcomes for Black males. So we need the Department of Education. So to me, the intentionality of what the Trump administration is attempting to do there and the implications for communities of color is great.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about some of the things that people are saying in my own community about just this whole issue of education and how they are disheartened by what's happening in the public school system, pitting charter schools against public schools. And again, I think oftentimes that becomes a distraction in terms of education, because one of the things that's bothered me for many years is the notion of a good school. I've gone into these conversations where people have talked about good schools and bad schools. And I'm thinking, if education is the value that we all believe it is and should be, shouldn't all schools be good schools? Shouldn't we be fully invested in making sure that all schools have the resources, the teachers, the facilities that are necessary, that there are opportunities being created for the parents who may be struggling in their communities to make PTA, PTO meetings, to provide extracurricular activities for their kids? If education really is all that we know it to be, then why do we have good schools and bad schools? Why do we use terminology like that? Because that automatically creates a division among us. And that's something that's always challenged me as I thought about that. The fact that some people literally seem to be content with saying, let's abandon the public school system and let's go to the charter school system because it's a much better way to go. Your thoughts about that?
We're in agreement. I think the language around it is problematic and damaging. I think about, for example, the way that we talk about, I think Ivory Tolson comes to mind immediately, the liaison for education for the NAACP and Howard University education scholar, who made the point about even the way that we talk about education for communities of color, we talk about Black kids as endangered species. We talk about bad schools. That language stigmatizes, and it stigmatizes in ways that are not only psychologically damaging to the communities, but then become the cornerstone for the argument about why the money invested in education is not invested properly. That money should be going elsewhere. And I think part of that, and this is why I've been a big advocate of public school, even though my critics will say, well, you went to private school, you're trying to deny Black and brown kids the same opportunities you got in the private school that you went to, which I got through scholarship. No, that's not what I'm doing. I think that money should have been invested in public school to begin with. All of our resources, more of our resources should be invested in public school so every student has an opportunity for a quality education. We know that there is an achievement gap. We also know we can conquer that achievement gap by a deep investment in public education and allowing public schools to do some of the same things that private schools can do just because they're better resourced. Small class sizes, for example. In a moment where the administration is talking about English as a primary language, making sure you have resource officers in schools, making sure that you have ESL programs that address the quality issues that affect students who don't speak English or English is not their first language. And then quite frankly, brother, and I know this is something that really just burns me. Recognizing the fact that this isn't an arbitrary contribution that you're making into the future of the community or into the future of the nation. This goes back to what I shared just a few minutes ago, where you've got Jefferson himself making the case that this informed electorate is going to be essential to the protection and preservation of American democracy and democratic practice. You get the folks that ride in and say, let's cut our history curriculum. All kids need to know how to do is code, or we lag behind the rest of the world in math and science. This is a news flash and a wake-up call for everybody. Cutting out those literature courses, denying an opportunity for ethnic studies courses, African American studies courses, cutting history and civics has put us in a lot of ways in the jeopardy we find ourselves in today, where young people don't have the minds, critical thinking skills to be discriminating, and the information they consume don't understand their history or haven't been presented it in a way that they can connect the dots and say, this isn't in my interest. And quite frankly, that serves the kind of authoritarian designs that we're seeing play out in the Trump administration. Doge, for example, it's a great example. I don't know how anybody who came up, and you know what I'm about to say, kid, who came up when we came up would look at that and say, that's a violation of separation of powers. We learned that in 4th grade.
Right.
This is almost cartoonish. And that's what's so scary about it, is that this should be a course. Everybody should be, in unison saying, this is a violation of those core democratic values that we associate with our Republican form of government. And that's not a failure of teachers. That's deliberate policies that are now bearing fruit in ways that have been, I can't say will be, that are damaging, that are eroding our republic.
Yeah, great point indeed. And to the point of erosion, we know that there was an economic boycott on February the 28th that many people engaged in, mostly people of color, I would imagine, but there were allies as well that spoke out very strongly about supporting this economic boycott against companies that have abandoned their commitment to DEI. And I'm going to talk a little deeper about the DEI piece in a moment, but I want to focus on the economic boycott for a moment. I want to ask you basically what your thoughts are about the boycott. I know that Reverend Jamal Bryant has announced that 100,000 plus people have signed the commitment to participate in the targetfast.org blackout for the next 40 days. And where do we go from here in the context of creating leverage with the gains that have been made in this moment?
It's a great question, and I'm of two minds here, because this is a thorny and difficult one, because there were kind of two layers to that boycott. There was the layer in our community, which you spoke to, where you have folks who are saying this economic boycott is around the dismantling of and undermining of policies that we associate with DE&I, which were addressing these historical injustices in our community. That came as part of the racial reckoning that went along with the murder of George Floyd in 2020. These companies made these commitments. They're now walking away under the cover of the Supreme Court's decision in Fair versus Harvard, under the cover of Trump's executive orders. We're not going to stand for that. And then there was the, part of this, the element of this, which was started by the gentleman in New York who was like, hey, prices are just too high. So this isn't political. We are just going to, let's have a blackout on the 28th of February, because if we all vote with our feet in this way against these enormous prices, then maybe that'll bring the prices down and people will recognize their consumer power. So two things there. One, I had a lot of folks go, well, how is this effective? Because it's not sustainable. Well, in our community, we're taking that out of the page book of the civil rights movement. So that 40 days is important. It's like, no, not one day, 40 days, right? So we're going to go in the wilderness on this one, right? And demonstrate Black economic power. But we also have to understand the power of coalitions. And I had a lot of folks kind of upset with me because they said, we don't get why you're endorsing the 28th. You're spending so much time talking about the 28th. You're not talking about the things that are happening in the community. Because I don't care how I bring people to the church, right? I just got to baptize them in the fire that collectively we're going to have strange bedfellows in the work of stopping the tyrant who's currently sitting in the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And so that means that I may have to hold my nose in a way that people over the last 4 years in particular have become accustomed to speaking in echo chambers and around the faithful, around the choir. We're not in the choir anymore. Mm-hmm. So if that means that you're upset with Target because you have to pay $6 for eggs, and I'm upset with Target because they dismantled DE&I and I have to pay $6 for eggs, I'll take you. I'm happy to have you on this team, because either way, if that company feels the pain, then we might get what we need out of the bargain. But my other concern, Kenny, and I know, as a historian yourself, I know you're keenly aware of this. I think we need to find ways to talk about this more in community, though. There were folks in those organizations. I think about Kira Fernandez at Target, who headed up their DE&I efforts, who were trying to figure out how to navigate. And so within the company, as we kind of peel back the layers, we see that they actually are continuing the work. They just didn't articulate it well enough. And so now my fear is we have a little bit of we're charging the wall of Jericho, right? We're trying to batter down this wall. And actually our interest and energies might be better served in thinking about this against some of the real Amazon we need to take down, right? And Jeff Bezos. I love what the Europeans are doing with Elon Musk. They are really hitting him in the pocketbook. So we have to think about it, I think, in those terms and decouple this to an extent from DE&I, because DE&I for me has become a little bit of a it's expert branding. I mean, I give this guy credit. I never watched the Apprentice. Maybe I should have. Everybody took the tagline, "You're fired," and they ran with that. But really, it's master marketing and promotion. And this is what this guy has done his entire career. Ledger Germain, sleight of hand, and these are not your droids from Star Wars, like Jedi mind tricks. I'm successful even though I've gone bankrupt, right? And all these other crazy things that we see with them. The whole language around that Trump employs is masterful. I hate to say that, to say we're getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and to just keep repeating that, or to call DE&I illegal and just keep repeating, not illegal. The vast number of beneficiaries from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and belonging initiatives have been white women, and it includes the disabled. There's a great piece that just came out. I just mentioned Ivory Toldson a few minutes ago. Why people with disabilities tend to hang out at Black spots. That's because those are the places most likely to be employing and honoring the language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 about access and accommodations. So again, a lot of opportunities been built on the back of the experience of Black folks. People don't know that history, but then doubling down on DE&I as if it's an issue that just affects us without thinking more broadly about, in this moment, as uncomfortable as it feels, we got to build the biggest tent that we possibly can. And maybe convert some of the folks who, quite frankly, got on their knees last October and November and said, Lord, please take away my neighbor's cow, right? Now that their cow has been taken away too, we have to maybe kneel next to them and say, Lord, forgive my neighbor for wanting to take away my cow. But now that his is gone, hopefully I can get him to appreciate that our prayers are the same, that our hopes and aspirations are the same. And what separates us, at least in a way that he or she is thinking about it, is about what they feel they're entitled to, as opposed to what our Constitution commits us to, our value system commits us to. There's a disconnect there, I think, in the way that people talk about that. But for me, DE&I becomes a little bit of a misnomer, and it kind of moves, it creates a gulf between those people who go, egg prices are too high, but Black folks are still getting stuff that I'm entitled to. Egg prices are too high, and if I get you in the church, I then can work on you about why you're wrong about us getting things that you're entitled to. But I got to get you in the pew next to me first.
Yeah. Listen, you're talking my language for sure. It's something that I talk about a lot with people, and it's something that I appreciate engaging in dialogue with people about, who are really kind of trying to reconcile this whole notion of, do we stay in the fight for DEI, or do we really try to redefine it or help people understand what it is? And I read the article that you co-wrote with Cherie Curry. Cherie Curry. And the thing that jumped out, there was a sentence in that article that jumped out to me more than anyone. And I want you to kind of talk a little bit more about that, because you've already begun talking about it. But you said that DEI has never been about favoritism. It's about fairness. And I think that's exactly where I try to take people when I start talking about this whole thing of DEI. Why is it important? Why does it happen? And I try to tell people that there is no DEI program. You can't go to this box and open it up and say, oh, there DEI is. Let's get rid of it. Let's kill it. Let's, exercise it. I said, no, really what you're doing is you're fighting against something that actually is happening, that you've probably benefited from, and don't really understand what it is, because it has been demonized. It has been weaponized. And like you said, it's been repeated over and over again as the enemy. So people have really bought into that. Talk a little bit about that whole notion of not about favoritism, but about fairness.
It's a great question, Kenny, because I think it comes from a misreading by people, deliberately so, of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. People fast forward to the end, and they get to the part where King talks about being judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And from there, they land on, well, we've eliminated barriers to access because of race. And so therefore, if you are creating set-asides or quotas or giving preference to people of color, then you're not living by Dr. King's words. But number one, DE&I, as you pointed out, has never been about set-asides, quotas, or preferential treatment. It's been about the fundamental doctrine of fairness. Have you explored all avenues and solicited applications from all potential places in the effort to diversify the workforce and to make sure you're extending opportunity more broadly? So, for example, if a company is part of its DE&I policy, as you pointed out, you're not going to find a box says, we are going to now recruit at historically Black colleges and universities. That's about fairness. That ain't about a set aside. Doesn't mean we'll hire. It means that we might be missing talent that exists in spaces that we haven't previously utilized, that we haven't previously accessed. And so therefore, we're going to make a deliberate effort to access those spaces. It's being misread by people who then say, well, then they're getting this, right? And they don't do that for us. No, it gets done for white folks all the time. It's just called a job fair. For us, we've had to have this kind of reimagination of it in ways that say, if you want folks who are going to historically Black colleges and universities, or even beyond that point, if you want people to be interested in your company, you need to demonstrate your openness to giving them a fair shot at equal employment. Now, I want to be very clear what I mean by this, because this is, I've heard you speak on this, and we're of one mind. But I am going to, for the sake of my own sanity, share this again with your listeners. For the sake of fairness, right? I am then saying, as a company, well, we're opening up this opportunity most broadly because we feel that we may have missed some talent that exists in other spaces. And we also recognize that a diverse workforce, a diverse team, give us the best chance to do three things. Number one, to be innovative in the way that we approach our business. Number two, to create a community of belonging and inclusivity, which is good for the team, particularly given the changing demographics of the nation. And number three, to recognize that talent that's not utilized or underutilized hurts us all. Now, having said that and put it in those terms, I love telling people this story. 1966, Star Trek comes out. And everybody loves talking about Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I'm a huge Trekkie. I'll admit that. We look at the opening, and here's Gene Roddenberry that's got this crew that looks amazing. You got Mr. Sulu, Mr. Chekhov, Lieutenant Uhura. And in that moment, they're like, well, why did Roddenberry do that? Well, there are two reasons. Number one, in 1962, when Kennedy makes his moon speech at Rice University, one of the things he says specifically is, there is no prejudice in outer space as of yet. Mm. So Kennedy was suggesting, if prejudice comes to outer space, we're going to bring it there. Mm. And he suggested in that moment that it's going to take the best of all of our energies collectively to get there. So we can't afford to exclude anybody. He doesn't say that, but it's implied in what so that's how those sisters from Hidden Figures, right, get those opportunities, because there was no way we would have gotten to the moon by excluding people who had something to contribute. But the other thing I tell people is, in August of 1966, Mort Werner, who's the head of the network at NBC, sends Gene Roddenberry a memo that talks about NBC's longstanding policy of inclusivity. See, this foolishness that DE&I is new. Mort Werner says in that memo in August of 66, NBC has this longstanding policy of wanting to reflect the audience and the diversity of the audience who consume our programs. It has benefited us in terms of our ratings. It has produced innovative programming that has allowed us to soar over the other networks. And it's corporate responsibility in a sense that we believe that we can cultivate a larger audience if we're even more inclusive. Those are all good business practices. What do we get? Star Trek, the longest running franchise in American history. Now, maybe The Simpsons challenges that now, but I'm saying that Star Trek is just, and my man Roddenberry went one step further. He said, well, we're not going to stop at Mr. Sulu, Mr. Chekhov, Lieutenant Uhuru. We don't even put Mr. Spock, an alien, in there just in case. Like we don't want to make any mistakes. That was deliberate. That's DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I say all that because by the time we get to 1986, the Challenger disaster, anybody who's listening to us today, Google a picture of the Challenger space crew. That is a portrait of America, and that's a direct reflection of Kennedy's vision, NBC's policy, NASA then, not right away, but Nichelle Nichols uses her platform from Star Trek, the popularity of the show, to actually rally NASA to create a program for women and girls, not just Black women, women and girls, which ensures that Judith Resnick, who's on that 1986 crew, is going to be the fourth woman in space and the first Jewish Ukrainian woman in space. Ronald McNair, the descendant of sharecroppers and slaves, is part of that mission. Ellison Onizuka, Japanese American, is part of that mission. And then the Reagan administration selected a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, to be the first person in space because they wanted to democratize access to information. If that's not diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I don't know what is. So I wish these fools would stop talking about DE&I as being illegal and something that's been detrimental. Actually, it's been one of the things that's helped propel America forward. And Elon Musk wouldn't have his SpaceX if it wasn't for Kennedy and that mission, that program to begin with, which began with this acknowledgement of the importance of diversity and not denying people opportunity. And we have to understand, if we want that in a country that historically has excluded, then you need a mechanism to achieve that. And that's why we have those policies in place.
I'm going to exercise the discipline of a good moderator at this point, because I'm a Trekkie too, and we can start talking Trek stuff all day long from here. But I know there's a lot of other things I want to talk about. Boy, did I get excited by that. And you're right, too. There's another element of that as you talk about how it has diversified and then how it has been sustainable for so many years. Every subsequent Star Trek thing I followed, I've loved it from the beginning because it's always this experience of not just space, but it's creativity. It's the unknown. It's what one might imagine to be in so many situations that automatically creates a lot of excitement for the living. That's a part of what we are experiencing as human beings. And so I have followed everything about Star Trek, and let me get back on track here.
I just have to say, Kenny, you just made my day too, because to me too, I was born in 1971. It was the only programming when I was a kid that we were just in, and it wasn't a cartoonish representation. It wasn't even, the Norman Lear stuff, which was great because we were there, but it was always, Black pathology on display. You had character, and they've continued that process, So I've always appreciated the franchise for that reason, because it's done in a way that organically, that's what the Enterprise, no pun intended, was from the very beginning. It was this multicultural collection of individuals who were making a difference collectively by being able to not necessarily not see color, but to recognize the value in a diverse team. To me, again, Gene Roddenberry's vision, which was John F. Kennedy's vision, which if I can now make the Reagan administration work in that, talk about Werner at NBC, I got 4 white guys working together toward a vision that privileges multiculturalism. I think the current white guy in the White House should appreciate that argument.
Absolutely. I'm talking this afternoon with Dr. Yohuru Williams. He is Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and Founding Director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. We're just so honored to have him on board today to be able to talk about a lot of these challenges that we're experiencing and a lot of these things that we're facing and having to confront. I wonder what your thoughts were about the Oval Office meeting with President Zelensky and President Vance. President Musk. President Trump the other day. And of course, I'm being facetious, folks. I know who the president is, or do I? What are your thoughts about that meeting the other day?
Well, I'm chuckling with you, Kenny, but in all seriousness, I think there's a lot of truth and power in that joke, because the question is who's running the farm. Mm-hmm. I was embarrassed, deeply, deeply embarrassed as an American. I thought from the cartoonish way that he was questioned about Zelensky was questioned about what he was wearing, down to him then getting into this exchange with J.D. Vance, where J.D. Vance is essentially saying over and over again, you haven't showed us proper deference. You haven't thanked us. And then Zelensky kind of pleading for his people in that moment. The optics of it were very bad. I think legitimately in this moment, America has renounced its title to leader of the free world. And you saw European leaders immediately in the aftermath of that kind of articulate that. I also think, and I'm looking at some of the coverage today, brother, for the first time, we're seeing some Republicans come out and kind of distance themselves from the resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, from what happened on Friday and from this policy, and calling Putin out for what he is, which is a dictator and a tyrant. You also have some folks in this moment. I took a lot of heat over the weekend from, some people who are allies and some people who are critics who say, where was all this fire and with regard to what he did in terms of Palestine? And where was all this fire with regard to the mass firings? And what I, pushed my general pushback on people is, again, something that you and I share. The idea that when people get activated, we can't control. We just need to, once they're activated, find a way to mobilize that and channel that in a way that then can develop and blossom into some type of sustained action. So I'm like, people might have been discombobulated by the mass firings. They may have been disgusted and shocked by the suggestion of Trump taking over Palestine. I know that bothered the heck out of me. And I sat there thinking, what the heck is he talking about? But this may very well be the issue where it becomes just so crystal clear that people can no longer kind of parse, what it is that they think that they're seeing. But for me, I think it was a huge embarrassment for the United States. I think it'll be a blow to our foreign policy. It is an affront to everything that at least that we articulate about whom it is that we have imagined ourselves to be, certainly since the end of the Second World War. And I think there'll be huge consequences, not only for this, but again, rightfully so. Going back to the dismantling of USAID, the very open, it was the opening salvo of the Muppet Show there. And again, no pun intended, because I have no idea who's pulling the strings. But this is something that we should all be hugely concerned about. And I think today, and this is interesting for me to say because I'm uncomfortable with it, but United States citizens will be a little less secure as a result of the decision that JD, as Zelensky rightfully called him, and Trump made on Friday.
You're absolutely right about that. I posted something just this past week basically saying that I'm less comfortable with the fact that the defense secretary has now pulled back on cybersecurity efforts against Russia. The fact that we already have an increase in fraudulent activity and scams. You got Doge people who you don't even know running all over the place, grabbing information, personal, private information. We should really be prepared for a less secure environment as a consequence of that. And that's not just a few people. That's all of us are at risk as a consequence of that. I know you and I, again, share the concerns of HBCUs. I have noticed over the last couple of weeks a circulating piece on social media about the number of HBCUs that have closed since 1977, a very disturbing trend. Of course, I'm a two-time graduate of HBCUs, so very proud support of HBCUs. I have a couple of endowed scholarships at two of those schools, and I'm very, very deeply invested in the success. I'm on the 150th anniversary committee for Alabama A&M University this year. We're happy to be celebrating that. Record numbers of students who have enrolled as freshmen this past year. So the institution is thriving while others are in trouble. One of those is just about 90 miles away from me at Tennessee State University, just a little bit north of where I am right now. And Tennessee State, we've heard, has come under a tremendous amount of pressure in terms of its stability. At the same time, we've heard about Livingston College, which has come under a lot of pressure, that has received some significant support. In fact, there was a second $10 million donation and infusion of funds to help support it. We also saw where tennis star Coco Gauff donated $100,000 to the UNCF to help its fund provide scholarships. So we've got this very interesting landscape right now, I think, in terms of the pressures being placed on HBU through things like the education department being dismantled, perhaps, of the 1890 scholarships that were scrapped and then reinstored, and some of the other instability that's being created right now for HBCUs, some that are already floundering and some that are already on life support. What would you say about the state of HBCUs today, and what's it going to take for the ones that still exist to survive and to thrive?
This is it's a thorny question for me, Kenny, because you and I both share an appreciation for HBCUs, and I would argue that they have served an important function in the African American community, but they've always been particularly post-integration, and I'm really talking about post-civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, when you had the first efforts to integrate graduate and professional schools, and then undergraduate education, which we saw with James Meredith at Ole Miss, and then everything that follows from that. The argument in recent years has been the graduation rates are low, and so therefore a lot of these schools are not efficient. This is not, it's a waste of money. Students go there, they're not matriculating, they're not finishing, and so why are these schools open? My problem with that is you're taking a high school argument and applying it to university. So you're saying graduation rates are a metric by which we're going to establish a yardstick for evaluating the effectiveness of these institutions without interrogating a host of other questions, financial resources, for example, that could factor into why the graduation rates are so low there. And then you're also denying the kind of historic mission of HBCUs to provide quality education and access for students of color away from, first it was because there were segregated spaces, and later on because of the hostility that students of color still experience, Black students still experience at majority institutions. A few years ago, when I was at the Jackie Robinson Foundation, the CEO, Della Britton-Baeza, wrote a piece for HuffPost where she talked about maybe some of the schools should be closed or merged. I did not like that piece. She and I didn't have I didn't agree with her take on it, because my fear was that we were missing the element of that conversation that speaks to why a Tennessee State and a Virginia Union, a Bensil Park, because it's legacy, because it's comfort, because it's access, because it's being seen. And I think people who don't factor that in miss the point that these institutions have served a very important function. And if we're going to start drilling down, or if the argument is let them go to community college and then matriculate into four-year institutions, then you better have diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging program and affirmative action program in place, because they'll never make the numbers, right? And the standards that are established. Now, then you get people go, well, are you arguing for different standards? No, I'm arguing for reality. Some of the most talented people have come out of HBCUs because they have selected in. And some of the most talented people have gotten opportunities at HBCUs because they would have been excluded otherwise. We need to start talking about it in that context and push back against this argument that somehow we're going to apply metrics that don't meet the historical realities and the mission that these schools serve from, Bowie State on down. And I think it's very important then. Now, again, you're finally getting some of the funders to step up, and we're talking about scholarships. But I think that the corollary to what we've seen over the last few weeks with the Trump administration is going to have dire consequences for HBCUs. I think the survival of these institutions, other than the flagship institutions, is probably the most precarious as it's been at any time in our history. And we really have to think through if there are combinations now or conversations about how we might create or sustain that, I think they come now in a way that's driven by this existential threat from the Trump administration.
I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about Ibram X. Kendi taking his talents to Howard University.
Ibram is a friend. If you read his first book, Stamped from the Beginning, I'm one of the, if you flip to the back, I endorsed him. He was my mentee. Peniel Joseph and I published his first book, the Black Campus Movement, at when we had a series at Palgrave. So I know Ibram intimately. I was perplexed, disturbed, and encouraged all at the same time. And there's probably three people on the planet I could say that to, Kenny, who would get it. You, my pastor, and my wife. But let me be transparent for everybody else. Right. Although I think you know where I'm going to go with this. He had such success in the last 8 years since the publication of Stamped from the Beginning. And then there were the allegations of financial impropriety that dogged him at BU. And you could almost see it was like this opening salvo, and a lot of allies, including people of color, Black folks, came at him and said, hey, it's not just a financial impropriety. You've done a lot of damage with anti-racism. Like, anti-racism as a thing became a commodity, and it wasn't really getting at, the deep core of inequality in our society. It was, in a way, and many of them suggested, a scam. I have a problem with that because I think Stamped from the Beginning is still a phenomenal piece of scholarship. And I think anti-racism appropriately created a space for conversation that wouldn't have existed otherwise. But in returning to Howard, it's almost, or it felt like to me, less of a victory and a return to the roots, and more like a repudiation and now I'm going to go, and I'm not saying this about him personally because I love the brother to death. It was like, well, now I'm going to go hide back where it's safe, right? Or I've been kicked out of the literally the ivory tower to return to the Chitlin circuit. I don't think of Howard that way. I went to Howard. Howard is the flagship of Negro education, as we call it, or Black education. So many people that I respect and admire are there. But I'm saying the optics of it to me didn't feel right. And I felt like if there's all this anti-racism, and that work was effective, then fight for your place at BU, fight for your place in the academy, wherever it may be. Kind of returning, and Hannah Nicole Jones is at Howard now too. So it feels like the whole 1619 project just went to Howard. Well, love y'all didn't come out of Howard, right? But you going back to Howard. And again, it'll be complicated for some people to understand where I'm coming from this, but some of that to me felt a little inauthentic. And I'm still struggling with that, because I felt like you had these privileged spaces that you occupied, and now you kind of retreat here. Are you bringing those resources back with you? Because the height of those resources were developed and they stay at those other institutions. Now that the billionaires have walked away and the millionaires have walked away and the funders have walked away, you come back to the HBCU. We could have used that shine and that money when you were riding on top. If you were at X institution, BU or wherever before and getting millions of dollars, that would have been the moment that you could have gone to a Howard or a Spelman or a Clark Atlanta or Tuskegee or Dillard, and that would have felt like, whoa, you know what I mean? We're anchoring this in the HBCU and in that tradition. So that's why I feel that way. And again, apologies to anybody who that lands wrong on, but I just got to be honest about how I was feeling when I saw that.
No, I appreciate your transparency. That has a lot of merit and a lot of value because of your personal relationship as well and your intimate knowledge about Ibram. Let me ask about Joy Reid and her departure from MSNBC, and then Lester Holt's departure from NBC. And if there's anything about that departure that is curious to you, just your general thoughts about those two transitional points.
Well, I'm going to say this again. Go back to Brother Malcolm in this sense, and Martin Luther King, and Floyd McKissick, and and Ella Baker and Anna Arnold Hedgeman. So people don't accuse me of being, just talking about men here. We need to create Black spaces where we can't be removed. What bothered me, Kenny, is we watched Joe and Mika go down and kiss the ring, and their ratings have been falling, and they are immune from being removed. Mm-hmm. But the first time that MSNBC makes a move to kind of reimagine itself, the first person that goes is a Black person, is Joy Reid. Melissa Harris Perry suffered the same fate. And then, God bless her, Rachel Maddow speaks on it, and people celebrate Rachel Maddow for speaking out on it. But Rachel, you still got your job.
Right.
So thanks for naming the thing that even you're not vulnerable in that way, in the way that Joy was. Now, to be fair, MSNBC is a business. So if you want to point to failing ratings and talk about in this moment, Joy struggled to find an audience in a network that's struggling to find an audience, so on and so forth. And that's why we made that decision and look at our new format. But if you look at the people they're bringing on and what they're trying to do, we're now post-Black, not in the way that Obama talked about it. Because in the Obama moment, Obama may have talked about post-racial, but Black folks started showing up everywhere because legacy media recognized they had a need to kind of be inclusive and to be able to talk meaningfully about things that were happening in the Black community relative to the news cycle and relative to who was showing up in important spaces. That moment's passed. Trump came in with a cabinet with one Black person on it from HUD, right? This is not even what we saw in 2015. This is insane. Like one Black person. You got Linda McMahon and all these crazy people, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, brother, I cannot stand Ben Carson. But, Mr. We could use a man like Ben Carson again. And at least Ben Carson had some bona fides, right? You had some expectation of something.
Right.
So for me, where I sit in relation to this is this deep discomfort in this moment with Joy being let go and the network thinking that it's fooling people, but our community knowing and recognizing. We've seen this show before. We saw it with Melissa when Trump came in. When we go back to white supremacy, the Black faces disappear, right? I realized that there was an argument to be made against Don Lemon and his behavior at CNN. But the reality is, when it starts tracking in a certain way, all of a sudden there's no diversity, or the diversity is diminished, and we're left to, if I was those, Abby Phillip, and I'd be very worried right now about my job.
Yeah.
Lester felt worse to me because Lester Holt has been a fixture. He's the kind of person who, if you asked me to name leading Black journalists, he would not be at the top of my list. I don't think about that. And I'm not saying that he's transcended race in a way that, and oh, by the way, what we didn't talk about is that at that Black History gathering, Trump gave Tiger Woods an award. Like, you talk about the whole clown show of all of it, like transcending race and all that foolishness. But to be back on topic, it's not that Lester transcends race. It's that Lester became so ubiquitous at the network, it's hard to imagine the programming without him there. And the fact that he would go now, the optics of it are terrible. Terrible. There's no way. Now, maybe I'll hear later on that this wasn't based on, I doubt it. It'll be hard for anybody to argue that NBC as a brand made a decision in a moment to get rid of a signature fixture and a person who, presumably came in to occupy that role that Melissa Harris Perry once played as kind of this progressive thinker and to curate conversations meaningfully about what was happening in the American political landscape. And both have been left go, I think, to be replaced by more Caitlin Collins types or Ari, and again, don't think that you fooled us, I think is my concern, Kenny. You can do it. Just don't think you fooled us, because you didn't fool us. We know what's happening. We've seen this show before. We know how the show's played out. I say all of that, and I hope nobody lost me in sharing that, because we need to then create more spaces like this. When people ask me where to go for information or what, get off YouTube, turn on the radio. Like, these are the new fugitive spaces. This is the Underground Railroad. If you want to be fed, right, this is a space where it can still happen, where we can still now. Are we still in the devil's airwaves, as Malcolm put it? Yeah, but the devil ain't paying attention here. He's more concerned about, and we've always had to be creative in recognizing where the attention was, so we could have a conversation that ultimately became a tool and a vehicle for liberation, not just for our community, but for the Republic itself. So, my recommendation to folks now is they're watching this, don't organize for joy, and don't mourn Lester. Think more in terms about who's still left. How do we elevate them? Let's build the listener base for our folks that are still operating on public radio. Let's find those YouTube channels that are giving us access to individuals who are breaking things down as they relate to our community. I love what Mark Lamont Hill is doing, for example, right? So there are a number of folks that I think that we could talk about meaningfully. We're talking about reimagining spaces where, we can, now we take it in stride. We knew this was coming, right? The other folks better be, your days are numbered. Having said that, we should be thinking more about how we survive that in terms of cultivating and supporting those places and those individuals. We're still concerned about providing a reliable source of information for our community that speaks to the needs of our communities.
We've covered a lot of territory, and I know we're right at the end of the time, but I want to ask you one final question. I cannot let you get away without asking you about the Super Bowl halftime masterclass that Kendrick Lamar did. And of course, I confess a couple of weeks ago on the show that I didn't really know it was a masterclass until after the masterclass was over. And I had a chance to really dive a little deeper into understanding what happened. Even though I do follow hip hop, even though I know who Kendrick is and have great respect for who he is and what he represents, Pulitzer Prize winner and more, I just didn't get it in the moment, but I definitely get it now. And it was a masterclass. Your thoughts about it?
Kenny, and in regards from to my wife loves you. So if I didn't say regard, she'd be upset with me. Yeah. She got on me because look, I'm at 53, right? My moment is past, and I did not watch it live because I just wasn't, Trump at the Super Bowl. But I knew Kendrick, that song, They Not Like Us. Even the song was subversive, and I think he maximized that moment.
Yeah,
I think there are people who legitimately had a critique of not understanding that he needed to. Like, to me, that was some Harriet Tubman Ida B. Wells, Angela Davis. I mean, he just channeled so much of the ancestors and elders in a way that said, there's a conversation happening and you don't get it because you're not in it. And then later on, for some of us who came back and watched it after, then we were like, because we're just not, we're in network, right?
Right.
But we now need the phone with the big buttons. Like, you got to make it plain for me.
Right.
But I loved what he did. And I think people go back to Beyonce, get information at the Super Bowl and the optics of that. This was even better because this is the gift that keeps on giving, because it sits in that level where if you don't know, you won't. I love that.
Yes.
Like if you don't know that Stevie Wonder, Living for the City, is in conversation with Frederick Douglass and Henry McNeil Turner and Mary Church Terrell, and if you then don't understand that Stevie is in conversation with Kendrick, and that they're both in conversation with Nina Simone, and that was a slap at Mr. Backlash, and of course they're all in conversation with Langston Hughes, who's in conversation with County Cullen, who's in conversation. See, for me, I agree with you. That's why the brother won a Pulitzer. But to your point, there was a moment there where I just was like, why did you even go? And now I'm incredibly, my take on it is, it was an important cultural moment. But I think for our people, the gift that keeps on giving in that, and I'll make one last point here, and I think everybody will understand it from this standpoint. A lot of people picked up Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, and didn't know that he was flipping the language from chapter 3 of W.E.B. Du Bois between me and the other world. These are conversations, generational conversations that unless you're Black, you really need in on. And we need that now more than ever. We need the talking drum, right? We need to be able to communicate through a look. We need to be able to say stuff, and you walking by and you don't understand what we're doing the Vulcan death grip, and by the time you figure it out, it's too late. And a roundabout way to say it was a masterclass in the way that you defined it. But I also think, Kenny, what you do in this space is part and parcel of that tradition. What New School here in Minneapolis, St. Paul does. It was a collection of people that follow work of Mahmoud Al-Kati. Just creating these alternative spaces where that discourse can be made plain in the way that Malcolm talked about. And then when it gets shared, we talking across different regions of the country. I could be trapped in space with those folks and watch a Super Bowl show, and I could have gone back to my room floating in space and confident and comfortable that some things got said that needed to be said, and no one's the wiser. So, yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. We've been talking this afternoon with a good friend of mine. My brother, Dr. Yohuru Williams, is a distinguished university chair and professor of history and founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. He graces this platform from one time to another on my introduction and my invitation. And I'm going to continue to invite him to be introduced on this platform whenever he can make it. And I hope he can do it often. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man. If people want to just get connected with you, how might they do that?
So I'm off Twitter. I'm off Elonville, but certainly can connect on LinkedIn. And Kenny, again, love you, brother. Appreciate what you do and this work. So I'm looking forward to us connecting again soon.
Love you too. And my regards to your Queen Alexandra.
I appreciate that, brother. I'll tell her you say hi.
All right. Thank you. Take care, man. What a great conversation. A great way to start the show. As I said, I don't normally have a one guest interview for an hour, but I knew that Dr. Williams was going to be here, and he was so generous to be able to grant us this awesome opportunity to be able to talk and to share. And I am just so honored to be able to have him and his voice in this very important time and be able to share his perspective on a variety of different things. There's so much more that we could have talked about. But of course, I wanted to move on with my next guest, who I believe is up and ready right now. Reverend Derrick Green is going to be joining me this afternoon. He earned his bachelor's degree from Rutgers University, Newark, and obtained his Master of Public Management from the University of Maryland School of Public Policy in January 2018. Reverend Green was appointed to the Office of Senior Advisor for Diversity, Faith, Urban, and Regional Growth for New Jersey Governor Phil D. Murphy. In this role, Reverend Green works to implement public policy that will help all people. He led 2 successful campaigns and team operations. And we are joining with him this afternoon, I believe, by audio. Oh, there you are. Okay. His sign just kept coming up audio. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought he was there. Brother, how you doing this afternoon?
Man, if I can fix my deficiency in pushing the video button, I would be doing great. But I'm doing much better now that I see you, Brother Kenny.
Well, let me finish the introduction, because I was trying to do 2 things at one time, and I was like, wait a minute, I got to make sure he's there, or do I have him just by phone, or do I have him? But anyway, we got him. So Reverend Green is with us. His unprecedented and unconventional work with legislators has led to several state positions. He's advised heads of state, senators, governors, mayors, county executives, and countless other elected officials and community leaders. Reverend Green was a key strategist in the Moore for Maryland gubernatorial campaign, resulting in the election of Wes Moore as governor of that great state. He's a member, as I am, of the 100 Black Men of Washington. Of course, I'm the Greater Huntsville chapter member and the NAACP. He also founded the Interfaith Action Movement in 2020. He sits on the boards of the Capitol Philharmonic, the New York State Bank Implementation and Amistad Commission Board. And rather than spend all the time talking about who he is, let's talk with him, because he's here today. My brother, what's going on?
Kenny, it's always a pleasure and an honor to be in your presence. And you already know that. So I'm going to say it again. Thank you for this invitation, and honored to be able to, I was enjoying listening to the brother before me, dropping some jewels.
Yeah, indeed he was, man. I enjoyed talking with Dr. Williams for sure. There was a big event. I want to start here. I don't want to bury the headline. We got other things that we can talk about and will talk about. But there was a big event on this past February the 22nd at the historic Calvary Baptist Church in Paterson, New Jersey, not far from where I used to live and where I grew up in New York City. And of course, this was an event, as the announcement said, where the Interfaith Action Movement was inviting people to join in celebrating the legacy and impact of progress, honoring Reverend Derrick Green's legacy of advancing equity, opportunity, and sustainable change locally, nationally, and globally, past, present, and future. It was an awesome occasion, marked by so many different meaningful experiences and conversations and presentations. First of all, just congratulations on this experience. I know it was awesome. I know you and I have already talked about why I could not get there. I had absolutely wanted to be there on your initial invitation, had purchased my plane ticket, my hotel room and all, and then realized it was the same night as the inspirational choir. My wife had asked me to hang around to attend for that. So I had to do it, but man, what a great event. I've watched the images. I've heard some of the testimony. I've seen people respond. And of course, I saw the testimonial from Governor Moore. Brother, congratulations on this significant moment in time for you.
Kenny, it was an awesome experience. It's hard to put into words. I'm always the one who honors other people. And when Dr. Pamela Jones said to me, Reverend Green, we want to honor you this year for your birthday. And at first I said, well, and she said, no, Reverend Green, listen, we know you don't like all of that, but we want to honor you on your birthday. I said, okay. They put a committee together. And then from that committee, it became this honor my work, my life's work. And I told them that I would do it, but I wanted to make sure that instead of doing the electric slide and cha-cha slide at a hall, that I wanted to worship. I wanted to give God praise for what He has done in my life. any type of influence I have had is because of the favor that God put on my life. And I wanted him to know that I'm appreciative of the 55 years that he's given me,
Mm,
of which I was called at 9 years old.
mm,
And so they said, great. That's when Calvary, Reverend Dr. Randall Lassiter, the pastor of the historic Calvary Baptist Church, said, well, it's going to be at Calvary. That's one of my, I call it my home churches. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, but I have home churches in other denominations. I was mentored and taught by preachers from many denominations. I was taught by Muslim imams, and so I respect the religions. And Calvary is one of my home churches, and they wanted there, and it was to get video tributes from two different governors. Governor Westmore of Maryland, first African American governor in the history of Maryland, and the third Black governor of the nation, sent a video, and also Governor Murphy and First Lady Tammy Murphy of New Jersey, who I've had the honor of working for the last 10 years of my life, and we've done some really great initiative, making people's lives better, building a stronger and fair New Jersey, and the faith leaders and community leaders that came out. Um, I was I felt like it was in another world, and I thank God for it.
there's so much.
Not to mention my boys.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, hold
so
that thought, because I was about to say
yeah,
there's so much to unpack about this thing.
yeah,
Hold that piece for just a minute. We're gonna come there. But I want to ask you this, because it's like every time we talk, something resonates with me. But this really resonated with me in this moment, because you talked about your other home churches,
yeah,
and I feel the pride that you have in having these relationships with other congregations and
yes,
other leaders in those congregations. And it's something that I have found to be one of the greatest elements of my own legacy, because I'm moving this community from North Huntsville to South Huntsville to East Huntsville to West Huntsville. And I know lots of people from different congregations. I've worshiped in their congregations. I've aligned my mission and my initiatives with other people from other congregations. And I'm a lifelong Seventh-day Adventist. And what I wanted you to do was just talk a little bit about why that has significance for you, and why that was something important for you to pursue as part of your life's journey.
yeah. I think you're spot on. I think it was because of my father. Growing up in Atlanta, my father introduced me to the what I call the African American ecosystem, the political and economic, social, religious ecosystem. And when you talk about that ecosystem, the foundation is faith, is the church. In my view, is the church. And so my dad, I got called at 9 years old, on the steps of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. I'll never forget it.
Mm.
And my father exposed me to different denominations. Man, grew up Baptist, and where my father taught me not to be isolationist, or an elitist, thinking that because you have the truth, or because you worship on a day, or don't worship on a day, that makes you somewhat better than someone else. Well, that's not the case. When you're not an isolationist, you get a chance to learn from other people and other groups. I've had the opportunity to sit at the feet of some of the greatest preachers in the world. Seventh Adventists. I mean, when you talk about being, I've had the opportunity to listen and to be taught by E. Cleveland, who, in my view, is one of the best preachers I've ever heard. I've had the opportunity to be taught by folks like Damian Johnson, a young pastor, who was my pastor at Seabrook, Seventh Adventist Church in Lanham. But I've also had the opportunity to be mentored and taught by folks like Bishop Reginald T. Jackson, who is now the bishop of the Second Episcopal District of the AME Church. He gave me we worked on racial profiling together back in the early 90s. I had a little office in his corner when he was the pastor of the St. Matthew AME Church in Orange. When I think of Dr. Lassiter, Dr. William Watley, Reverend Dr. Regina Thomas, these. When I think of when I was at Oakwood, Minister Theo X. I don't know if you remember him back in the day.
Yeah,
Minister
I do.
Theo X.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing him when I was a student at Oakwood. I brought him on campus to speak in the boys' dorm when WSB had the WSB report, and we talked about AIDS then. Yeah, remember that, Kenny? And so I have been molded and shaped by women and men in different denominations and faiths. That I've had some deep discussions with Buddhists and folks that are Hindu. But what I realize is that people are trying to make it in this world. And it is not my job to judge. It's my job to help them make it. Yeah. And it's their job to help me. We are all citizens of humanity.
Yep.
I worship my God. I believe in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I believe that he died for my sins and he rose again. And I believe he's coming back. I believe that. I believe that he's going to resurrect the dead. And I believe that we're going to be reunited with our loved ones. I believe in the seventh-day Sabbath. I believe in all of that. But that's what I believe. And I respect others who may believe differently than I am. Yeah. And we have good dialogue. And those churches have welcomed me in, and they embraced me, they covered me. And I'll tell you, sometimes I feel more comfortable in some of those churches, and I'll leave that right there. I'll leave it right there. Because they love on me, man. They're not about judging. They love. And when you are going through things in life, you want to be loved. And we need more of that going around, brother.
I tell a story about going to a local Baptist church in Decatur many years ago to hear a concert by Calvin Hunt of the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest churches in Decatur. And I came with a friend. And as we were driving up to the church, it was raining that day. We parked way out in this big parking lot. And we saw these shadowy figures running towards the car. And, of course, I'm from New York. My man is from Chicago. We both kind of think like, what's going on, even though we're living in Huntsville and we're going to a church service. They're running towards the car. Like, what's going on? And so they were people from the church there to meet us at our door with umbrellas to make sure that we would have a safe passage to the church.
Yeah.
As we walked into the church, there was a gauntlet of people welcoming us into the fellowship of that church. These were not ushers. We hadn't even got to the ushers yet. This was just a group of people in a hallway in a line saying, welcome to our church. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad you're here. Man, we both looked at each other and said, I don't think I've ever experienced that anywhere before.
Yeah.
And so to your point, when we get out and we start experiencing other people, if we're confident and secure who we are, there should be no fear. In fact, I welcome those opportunities. And not one time have I had a conversation with somebody of a different faith or somebody who was an atheist or agnostic who said, you need to do what I'm doing. You need to be what I am. I've never had that conversation with somebody. I've just had fellowship, engagement, and communion.
And if you are spot on. And really, that's how Jesus lived on the earth. If we would do more and have a better understanding of the social theology of Jesus Christ, meet people at their need, love thy neighbor as thyself. When you see people in need, you help them. Jesus saw people sick. He healed them. He met people at their needs, and that's why the man followed him. He fed people when they were hungry. We completely missed the mark, Kenny, when we go into the, well, you got to join me. You got to be me in order to get to him. And when Jesus lived by example, I've tried to in my life to live by example. When people say, you really out, you have a lot of different people who with you or who follow you or whatever they do. It is not because I preach to people. I can preach, but it is because when I work on increasing the minimum wage, when I work on the second chance agenda, which has been the most progressive criminal justice reform agenda in the nation, when I work on with First Lady Tammy Murphy taking the lead in reducing Black infant and maternal health issues and morbidity, when I work on affordable housing and making sure that people are able to afford where they live, when I work on healthcare, this is what draws people to me.
That's right.
The need, when I'm addressing the needs of people, and I say that my church is the community, and that's where my ministry is. And I was ordained as an elder in the Seventh Adventist Church 20 plus years ago. All right, and one of the reasons why I was ordained was because of my work in the community, my understanding of Scripture, my understanding of the connection of Scripture and meeting people at their needs, and we've been able to do that. And I strongly urge folks that are in the ministry that should be the number one. And what happens is that, Kenny, the denominations, too many, and something that have become so corporate centered, numbers based, because it's a layer of bureaucracy and corporate hierarchy. You start off as a pastor and you go to the conference, and then from the conference to the union, and maybe hopefully to the DC, and in between all that, we haven't opened up healthcare centers. We haven't opened up affordable housing units for seniors. We have not opened up, after school programs for youth. We haven't turned our Pathfinder to a national organization because we teach discipline and self-respect and honor and dignity, stuff that the world is craving for. But we want to keep the Pathfinders to ourselves and be happy when we have a drill team at camp meeting. Sorry, kid.
I mean, folks that are listening, some people say, "Why is he laughing?" Well, if you happen to be a part of the brethren and the sisters, you know what we're talking about, and you know what Reverend Green's sentiment is, because it's so interesting too. And let me, now you messed me up because we also, I was watching the Pathfinders one day, and when I say the Pathfinders, I'm not giving them an identity. So just because I'm in Huntsville, I'm not talking about your Pathfinder club. I'm just saying Pathfinders in general. I was watching a Pathfinder performance, and I mean, they were getting down.
Yes.
I mean, they were rocking it hard. I mean, the drummers were drumming, the people carrying the batons were twirling and dipping and diving and sliding and doing all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've seen some of those moves before.
Yes.
In secular environments. And the point I'm making is this: we get hung up sometimes with our young people on condemning things that are natural to their development, that are natural to their culture, and they're not necessarily offensive to God. And it's because of our discomfort with those things and our inability to connect with those things that sometimes our young people spend time in church when they're young, spend time in Pathfinders when they're young, go to church school for a period of time when they have to, and then leave the church when they get a chance to, because they haven't
Yes.
spent time on the front end, as you say, building the relationship with God, meeting people's needs where they are, and being in a position to keep the gospel relevant, which is so
Yes.
important for people in this experience.
Our churches, some of our churches are experiencing some issues because the pandemic changed the idea of church forever.
Yes.
And I think that there are opportunities that have come out that we actually study. We bring faith groups together. Matter of fact, I'm having a big conference in the spring, early spring, in partnership with Kane University in New Jersey, bringing faith leaders together to really talk about a number of things: youth development, trauma. I'm on a campaign to end trauma, systemic trauma. We're talking about how faith organizations can be a part of the affordable housing crisis, how they can address it using their infrastructure. I believe that the foundation, particularly when it comes to the Black community, faith is in the faith community, and there's so many things that can come out of. I believe in thriving, active church. No matter how small or large you are, you can be engaged, and we teach that. We actually teach folks how to do that, and it's been very successful.
That is so powerful and so very good. I'm talking this afternoon with Reverend Derrick Green. He also, and I buried a little bit of the headline early because he's also a regular commentator on the What's Going On segment. Whenever he has an opportunity to pop in, we'd love to have him. He, of course, is the co-founder of a group here in Huntsville many years ago on the great campus of Oakwood College and Oakwood University today called Willing, Succeeding in Black, WSB or SB, as some people came to say. And as part of the experience that he recently had, where he was honored for his legacy of service locally, nationally, and internationally, had a special group of people join him as well. I'm going to give him a chance to talk a little bit about that part of the experience.
You know, Kenny, Oakwood University is very, very special to me. I wrote on Facebook about why I love Oakwood so much, and one of the many reasons, not to mention the excellent academic preparation that I received when in my major, which was history. Dr. Emmanuel Saunders is one of the greatest professors that I've ever had, and he helped mold my mind. He called me an economic determinist. I'll never forget that. An economic determinist, because I believe that when you talk about slavery, it had to do with money. But anyway, we can get into that later. But I had the opportunity to be a part and to help co-found an organization. Matter of fact, it came out of my brain, out of Dr. Janice Johnson Brown, her class, her Intro to Psychology class, and to start an organization called Willing, Succeeding in Black, WSB. And my co-founders were Neil Davis, my roommate, Wayne Kane from Bermuda, and Dwayne. And those guys came on Saturday. When I walked into that church, Kenny, and I saw Dr. Mason West, his wife, Dwayne Kane and his wife, Dr. Mason West's wife is Shamika. We all went to Oakwood. Dwayne Kane's wife is Rashonda. Wayne Kane's wife is Max. And I saw my best friend in life, I call him my BFF, Neil Davis, from 10 years old, and his brother Kevin. I lost it. The emotions filled my soul. We've done life together. We've done life together. When I met Neil in Atlanta, I was 10 years old. He was at my baptism. His father was an accomplished organist in Atlanta, and to play for my dad, as you know, was a musician. and a tenor soloist. And Kevin, his big brother, became my big brother. Parents became my parents. My parents became his parents. And then when we go to Oakwood and we meet when we're 18, we meet Wayne Mason, Eric Walsh, and Danette Bryan, all these folks, Lamont Dupree, and we formed this organization, Willing, Succeeding, and Black. And our goal was to impact the world. And in some ways, we've done that. But when I saw them on Saturday, and when they were able to share with me, as Dwayne said, it was like they were being honored. It's like they were being honored because they saw the calling come to fruition. They were there at the beginning. Kenny, they were there when you were there, when I didn't know what I was doing. And you saw the promise, and you helped mold it. You helped mold the talent. And they saw that at 18, and now that I'm 55, they were able to see the impact that God has allowed me to have. And it was one of the most special moments of my life to see those guys there.
I got to tell you, this is a moment of reflection for so many different reasons. And every time you say, I'm 55, Derrick, I gotta just tell you, man, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And it's not even about my age and me being older. It's like 55. I knew this guy when he was this young, ambitious, as I've described you, visionary, who was, bent on saving the world by any means necessary at 18, 19, 20.
Yes.
And you talk about being 55, and it's like, wow, what a tremendous legacy that you have built over the time, from that time, and even before, as I said. I want to ask you this question. As you look back over the course of your life, and you're being honored in this moment, and people are saying, Reverend Green, we value you. We appreciate you. We thank you for what you've done. Your most intimate friends have come together in this moment to celebrate with you. In addition to just the reflection that you have on the honor, what do you think about as you look over the journey in the context of what have you learned in that time? Because many years ago, you had a vision for where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. But now you've also had the benefit in this moment of having had the experiences. So what have you learned?
Yeah, I've learned when I went to Rutgers, I took a class called French Literature and English Translation. And I was able to study a philosopher by the name of Montaigne, who said that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And Kenny, this has been I'm a lifelong student. That's the lesson. Always learn, always improve, always surround yourself with people that can teach you something while you also teach. But don't close your ear don't become deaf to learning. And that has been that rule, and I'm gonna tell you how that applied to me and AI recently. I had the honor of being invited to the Afrotech conference in Houston, Texas. And I was invited by Fund 2 Foundation, which is the billionaire Robert Smith's foundation. And their executive director, Linda Wilson, invited me to the Afrotech conference. And I was there with some of the most brilliant. They had something called Intern Excel. And Kenny, it was a phenomenal business pitch conference at Texas Southern University, where students put together companies and they pitched AI solutions to deal with some of the social issues that we have, and economic issues, environmental issues that we have.
Wow.
And I actually attended. It was phenomenal. Um, but you're talking about a guy who thought AI. When I first heard AI, I thought they were talking about Allen Iverson. I'm like, wait a minute, AI, that's my guy. You know, he's a crossover. They're like, no, Rev, no. And you know, we're not talking about Allen Iverson. We're talking about artificial intelligence. I was like, oh, okay. So, but when I was there, I got a chance to sit down with Will.i.am, and a few of us for about 2 hours over lunch, and talking about what he's been doing in AI space. And when I as a lifelong student, as a lifelong learner, I said, wait a minute, I love these AI solutions. The student company that won because they have an AI solution to deal with gentrification. The one that came in second won because they had an AI, and that was an all-woman group, by the way. The one that came in second, they have an AI solution to deal with infant and maternal health, Black infant and maternal health. The third one had an AI solution to deal with climate change. I'm going nuts, right? Because I'm like, wow, I'm calling Governor Murphy on the phone, Kenny. We got to bring this to Jersey. We got to bring this. And you know what he did? Because I have some credibility, after I called him, he told me to text him. I texted him. He sent the text to at least 10 people and said, Rev got a great idea. I want you all to follow up. And we just submitted a proposal to do something that we're calling AI for good. Ooh. AI for good. And in New Jersey. So that's number one, Ken, is to always learn. The second thing that I have learned was when I was an intern, I had to leave Oakwood because of money. My dad lost his job. I had to come home. I was engaged. I was depressed and anxious. And Judy Saunders told me to do something. She called me, Dr. Saunders' daughter called me out of the blue and said, get up off your butt and do something. You got to do something, Derrick. You can't just waste away. And I went down and interned for Senator Frank Lautenberg. And that internship, my job was to make copies because there was no Google. And I had to send the clips, the news clips to the DC office. And that's what I did. And I said, I'll never forget, in my mind, I remembered when Dr. King talked about being the best street sweeper. I was the best copier maker. My copies were in line. My copies were on time. I got there early, and because I didn't have anything else to do, I stayed all day. And because of my hard work, I hope somebody's listening to me, a student or somebody, because I worked harder, because I stayed the extra mile, because I stayed the extra 2 or 3 hours without being paid. I caught the eye of a lady by the name of Christy Davis. God rest her soul. She just passed in December. Bishop Jackson's wife. And she became a mentor of mine. Every opportunity, 99.9% of the opportunities that I have had, indirectly or directly, have been because of Christy Davis. Because she saw how I made copies.
Whew. Man. Whew, there's a word in that, brother. There's a word in that. And as you just said, someone listening this afternoon, of course, we know we have people listening, not just in this area, which, of course, got a lot of academic institutions and people in school. We have people going back to school, non-traditional students. We got people listening all over the nation, all over the world. There's a word in that, folks, to just be the best of whatever you can be in the moment without any vision, perhaps, of saying, I want to be the next thing. I'm not saying don't have a plan. I'm not saying don't put your all into something. I'm just simply saying focus on the task at hand. Understand your assignment.
Yes.
And this brother understood his assignment. Derrick, man, that's some powerful stuff, man. That's rich, man. That will preach for sure. But I know something else that'll preach. You just launched a podcast as part of this experience as well. Tell us about that.
Yes. It's called Sitting at Babylon's Table. And it is, I am in Sabbath school. I had a Sabbath school teacher in Atlanta. His name was Brother McClendon. And Brother when I think about him, Brother McClendon couldn't have been any more than 5'6", 5'7", and he wore a black suit and white shirt and a black tie every Sabbath. And he had a hat that he had it kind of cocked to the left. Yeah. And I love hats. And this was my guy. I love Brother McClendon, and I enjoyed getting up early and being taught by him. And I remember my first lessons. I praise God for parents who invested in Christian education for me. They sent me to schools. They worked at schools where they couldn't afford to send me. And because Christian education is expensive, and they didn't get paid a lot. And so, but those lessons had an impact on my life. And Kenny, one of the early lessons was a lesson of the Hebrew boys. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and of course Daniel. And I was always just inspired by their story of how they stood strong in the midst of adversity. And so when I thought of my podcast and my life, I thought of sitting at Babylon's table, because that's where I sat, the metaphor. That's where I have sat all my professional life. I've sat at Babylon's table. I've sat at the seat of power. I've sat at the seat where that power will dictate whether or not somebody's can afford a home or not afford a home, where their wages are livable or unlivable, where their health care is accessible or inaccessible or unaccessible. I've sat where at the table of Babylon, where the disparity of between races, blacks and whites, are so wide. I've sat at Babylon's table, and what I've tried to do, and I've succeeded in some areas, and some areas I have not. I've tried to live my life to live that life of integrity, being able to speak truth to power. When they said, "Be it known, O King, that our God is able to deliver us from thee. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down or to thee or serve your golden image." And that said to me something. That said that, Derrick, you can also speak truth to power. When during the pandemic, when I said to the administration that, Governor, African Americans, as you know, have a very they don't trust the healthcare system because of the history of the Tuskegee experiment, of experiments at Johns Hopkins, and all. They don't trust, and healthcare is not oftentimes the first priority, because surviving is. And so you got to take the tests and the vaccines to places where where they feel safe, like churches, like mosques, where they go. And you have to have trusted faces promoting the COVID testing and the COVID vaccine. And that's why New Jersey had one of the highest rates in our urban areas of COVID tests and COVID vaccines, because I was at Babylon's table, and I was at the seat of power, and they listened. It's the same thing when we had the independent prosecutor bill, when the attorney general at that time told Governor Murphy to veto it. And, David and Dorothy Green's baby boy was at the seat of power. I was right there. And I said to Governor Murphy, I said, sir, we got to understand that the independent prosecutor bill, Kenny, requires the attorney general, in the case of a police involved shooting or killing, that they have to have an independent prosecutor to an independent review of the case, which in New Jersey is big, because a lot of times there was corruption on the local levels, in the county levels.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of folks telling the governor to veto what the legislature had passed, but the Oakwood University alum was in the building. I was at Babylon's table. I was there, and the governor. I said to the governor, this bill will help finally bring some transparency and trust between law enforcement and the community. And Governor Murphy didn't veto the bill. He signed the bill into law. And so the podcast talks about those experiences. It talks about I'm going to be bringing in guests, public policy folks like you. I'm going to be bringing in guests to talk about religion, and faith, and also one of my other favorite topics, which is fashion. That's the fun part.
Right.
As you can see, my favorite designer, one of my favorite designers, a brother by the name of Michael Lamont, does all my bow ties and some of my suits, and of course Ralph Lauren. That's my guy. Especially after they did the Morehouse line.
Shout out, man, that's good stuff for sure. And I know it's got to be a tremendous note of gratitude and satisfaction to have that platform, to be able to lift your voice in this way as a result of the journey that God has taken you on and the positions he's placed you in for such a time as this.
And Kenny, let me say this. The launch was, God spoke to me and said, surprise your boys right, and make them the first guest. But you got to understand that I knew they would be ready, because at Oakwood, at Cunningham Hall, we used to get in it at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. debating about Malcolm and Martin and Stokely and W.E.B. and Constance Motley and Rosa Parks and Shirley Chisholm. We would go in all night long without no notes, debating, all tired in class the next morning, because we were going to change the world last night in Cunningham Hall. So I knew that they would be ready, and were they ready?
Wow.
Some of them, Dr. Mason West, Wayne Kane, Dwayne Keynes, are some of the most brilliant brothers. And then we were blessed to have my friend, Dr. Kobe Little, immediate past president of the state chapter of the Maryland NAACP, was in the house.
Wow.
And they were my inaugural guest of sitting at Babylon's table, my podcast, which is the title of my book as well.
Wow. Now, let me first of all ask you, where can people get access to the podcast?
So we will, all they have to do is email me first at dgreen@thegreenconsultants.com, dgreen@thegreenconsultants.com, or you can email jrogers, ROGERS, @thegreenconsultants.com, and we'll give you all the information on how to access the podcast.
That's awesome. And then, of course, you're writing a book. What stage of the process are you in right now?
I am at the end. I'm in the editing phase of it right now. My ghostwriter has completed the book, I'm editing it now, and then I'm going to get. I have a marketing company that's going to take it from there. I'm using a gentleman by the name of Curtis Farrow, who was the. I don't know if you all have heard of the McDonald's Gospel Fest. He is the executive producer of the McDonald's. He's a brilliant Emmy Award winning, and he's handling all of the when we're ready, all the book strategy moving forward.
Boy, I tell you, I am so over the moon with the fact that all of these wonderful things have happened. What happened on February 22nd could not have happened had you not invested yourself in your purpose and allowing God to use you over the years. And you have done a magnificent job of demonstrating what a vessel in the hands of God can accomplish. You've been on an amazing journey that also includes a family, travel, and just some amazing experiences over your life. And I'm just so happy to have this opportunity to highlight that and profile you on the show today. We've just got a few minutes. I want to throw this in real quick because I know this just happened recently, but the passing of a civil rights pioneer, Hazel Dukes. I saw you post a photo, and of course, when I heard of her passing, I'm like, boy, we're just continuing to lose the pioneers, the elders, the ancestors, and more. Wow. Talk to me just briefly about Hazel.
Hazel Dukes is a national legend, civil rights legend, based in New York. She ran the NAACP in Manhattan for years, and she was in New York for years, and she was just an amazing transformational woman. I'm not going to over sensationalize who she was, because she was carrying the torch of Sojourner and Harriet, of Mary McLeod Bethune and Coretta Scott King, and she carried the torch, and she carried the torch well for the time that God assigned her on this earth. And while at it, she was able to touch many, like myself. I knew her. I got to know her through Governor Murphy. Governor Murphy was a national board member of the NAACP before he became governor, and he was very close with Mother Dukes. Yeah. And I then became close to her as well because of that. And I was able to learn from her. And trust me, when you were around her, all you did was listen. You listened, and because you knew that you were around greatness, and when you're around women like that in particular, you just take note. Yeah. You just take note, because you realize how old they are, and you don't know, how long they have to be here. And so you just take note. And I was like a sponge every time I was around her. The picture that I posted was at a NAN event that she attended, and whenever I was with her, I wanted to take a picture to memorialize that I had been with one of the greatest Americans to ever live. Mother Dukes fought for our people every day of her life, and she was serious about it. She was committed to it. She was unwavering in her commitment to our people, and she's resting in peace now, awaiting the resurrection.
Yeah, and I love the way you said what you said in those closing summarizations, that one of the things I take away from this moment of transition, Mother Dukes at 92, having lived her full life and having lived a life fully invested in making other people's lives better, and fighting for social justice and fighting for change and standing on the foundation of those that came before her, is exactly the reason why we must fight today and continue the fight for civil, human rights, and social justice. And it's to honor people like Hazel Duke. Rest in peace, 92 years old. I definitely wanted to throw that in. Reverend Green, if people wanted to connect with you, how would they go about doing that?
You know, email is the best. You can always go on my website, www.thegreenconsultant.com. And then, of course, my email address is dgreen@thegreenconsultants.com. Always email is the best way to do it because I check my emails regularly. I have a couple people checking the email for me when I can't get to it, and we will respond immediately. And then, Kenny, let me say this before I close, that you just said something. I thought of the great theologian, Dr. Howard Thurman, who taught Dr. King. And you talked about the spirit, the character, the spirit of a man, of a woman. Our spirits are under attack.
Mm.
The spirit of America, the character, as imperfectly perfect. I'm going to say it again, as imperfectly perfect as we are. We have somehow, through our imperfections, kept our soul. Dr. Howard Thurman talks about the soul. Let's protect our soul. Mother Dukes, her soul was intact.
Yeah.
Let's protect our character and our soul at all costs because it's under attack at this moment. But we have the teachers of the past who have taught us how to do it. We just need to know it and practice it, and we'll be able to be successful and fight against those that are trying to take away our soul.
That's right. That's right. I couldn't have said it better. That's why he's Reverend Derrick Green, and he's been my guest for the last 50 minutes or so, man. Thank you so much. I think we've unpacked a lot of stuff. I didn't touch a single thing about what's happening in the world today because I wanted to celebrate and honor you. I didn't want to bring the energy down in any way, but we're going to have you come back on one of our future segments of what's going on and let you dive in there. It's always good to see you, my brother. Love you, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Kenny, love you so much. I will always thank you for pouring into me. I would not be anything that I am today without you, my brother.
I am humbled and honored and appreciative of that, my man. Thank you so much, my brother. Love you, man.
Love you back.
All right. Reverend Derrick Green, what a powerful show today, folks. I tell you, I am just happy to be able to be in this place today, to be able to share this great information. I'm going to come back in just a minute and tell you about what's happening next week. In the meantime, it's Second Chance. I'm Kenny Anderson. I hope you're having a wonderful day.
Perhaps you have some ideas, comments, or suggestions that you would like to share. Or perhaps you'd like to be a guest on the broadcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to email Kenny Anderson at mxlife@aol.com, or you can like us on the Second Chance Facebook page. That's 2ND Chance. And now, back to more of Second Chance with Kenny Anderson.
What a show today, folks. Wow. Dr. Yohuru Williams, Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and the founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas, and so much more, joining me in the first half of the segment today for insight and perspective on quite a few things. And we, of course, are appreciative that he took the time to be with us. Reverend Derrick Green, appointed to the Office of Senior Advisor for Diversity, Faith, Urban, and Regional Growth for New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy in 2018. We're so grateful to have both of those young brothers on with us today, sharing insight and perspective on a variety of things in life and in our society. On next Sunday, it's What's Going On, my social and political roundtable discussion featuring commentary about what is going on in the world today. I know at this time, David Person and Stephen Foster will be joining me and perhaps one other person. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Remember, as always, knowledge is better than riches. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk again soon. Good day.
Thank you for tuning in to Second Chance. We hope that the information that was shared has been a blessing to you and that your life will be enriched as a result of it. We'd love to hear from you, so please send your email comments to kennethanderson@mxlife@aol.com. That's mxlife@aol.com. And check out our Facebook page, 2ND Chance. That's 2ND Chance. In the meantime, have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Good day.